How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Care Talk. Guys, it's going to be a quick discussion. We're going to be talking about inmate manipulation tactics and understanding the angles and defense strategies. Guys, if you get a chance, you should definitely have both these books if you work in corrections. Breaking Boundaries. So this is understanding and prevent and undue familiarity in corrections. So this is about how those undue relationships develop. And then you also have Inmate Manipulation Dakota. This is more of the tactical side of manipulation. This has been on the market for quite some time. But with that said, both books are available on Amazon. So if you guys get a chance, please check out Amazon to get these books. Now, we are going to quickly speed through some of these topics. We have Russ Hamilton, who's going to be a guest on today's show. We're just going to kind of go through it real quick, just as a refresher. If you guys want some more in-depth discussions on manipulation, we have tons of videos on that topic. And I also want to mention something too, guys. Remember, manipulation is about strategy. So these tactics, these games, they're not always employed in isolation. They're employed in partnership with each other. And our job here really is to recognize it within the context, within the setting that we're currently involved in. And with that said, not every inmate is out to manipulate. So when I give you these tools, this is not for you to develop paranoia, but rather to be prepared for each interaction you have with an inmate. For the most part, there are a lot of inmates that want to do their time and get on their way. But there are some who do want to make their time a little bit more convenient. And that's why we have to have these discussions. In corrections, we also always have to be wary that there's always going to be that wolf in sheep's clothing. All right, let me get Russ. What's up, Russ?
Good morning, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started way back in 1989 at San Quentin State Prison. I went on from that after I retired to work as a senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a company, though, that a private company that does work as far as rehabilitation and reentry for a local county jail and a local county probation department. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos. That's Chaos with a K on Facebook. And basically, we provide, mentoring, fellowship, history, training, everything to every corrections professional out there, not just the badge wearers.
Yes, and it's a great Facebook community. I also go on there myself, put some videos out there, but also listen to see what kind of topics are being discussed. You can always learn no matter, how much time you have in this profession, no matter what level you sit at, there's always something to learn. Okay, so Russ, I broke this down to 6 areas. We'll kind of speed through this. Guys, one day what I will do is we'll do a discussion where we break down those books on manipulation, especially the newer book on Breaking Boundaries. I really think that's a great book that has tons of information that really does apply to this discussion here. But basically, Russ, so the first, I broke this down to 6 sections. Now, mind you guys, as I said before, they don't always work in isolation. Usually they're strategically put together, but I do want us to recognize it. So with that said, I'm going to introduce it as if they are isolated, but know that they do bleed in. I mean, an expert manipulator finds ways to put these all together to kind of strategically employ their game of manipulation. So the more complex it is, the better it is for the inmate and the more confusing it becomes for us. So it's good to recognize it. All right, so I got testing boundaries and feeling you out. So what's the objective here? So the objective is to identify weak points, gauge your authority, and determine if you can be manipulated over time. So what are the angles? So we have compliance testing. So we have gauging if you'll bend the rules. We have familiarity building. So that's creating a false sense of camaraderie. We also have plausible deniability, which basically is they keep their statements vague enough so they can walk it back later. You got social pressure, making you feel like everyone does it. And then you have subtle defiance, pushing small limits to see what they can get away with. Now, I do have some phrases I'm going to put out there. Again, they're not all inclusive, but I just want to give you some phrases. I put some phrases down for each section. So this would be basically if the inmate's trying to manipulate, you may hear phrases similar to this. You know what I mean? and that's looking for subtle agreement without directly stating anything. You feel me? And that's testing if you relate to their perspective. Come on, you know how it is, and that's nudging you towards shared understanding. You cool, right? Seeing if you'll let things slide. Ain't nobody gotta know. That's encouraging secrecy. Just between me and you, again, creating a false sense of trust. We're just talking, right? And that's about easing you into conversation that can later be exploited. Some COs don't trip over this, and that's about seeing if you'll allow something others don't. That's how we do things in here. So that's normalizing rule breaking. And you've been working here a while, huh? And that's gauging how much you know about facility routines. What's your thoughts on testing boundaries and feeling you out, Russ?
I thought we were better than that, Anthony. So just there's there's a lot to that. The other one, of course, always is telling us about how some other officer approves of some action that they're doing, something that they're being allowed to do. So and this is just one of those things, and it can be I don't want to say cat and mouse necessarily, but what I do want to say is that they can put something out there in a method that they can retrieve it. They don't go beyond the boundary; they go right up to the line, and it's just one of those things. It's a gauging process essentially, and the gauging process is just to see. Well, there's a lot of different things in it because you did say it's strategic, but sometimes it might be less strategic in just that they want to know, what's okay with a particular officer. There may be a range and a time later on where they seek to try and manipulate more and more often, find more weaknesses, eventually possibly to be able to, get away with some sort of security breach, possibly even, later down on the line, depending on how receptive the officer is, to co-opt or corrupt. But they're not against, doing it to different levels with different officers just to serve the range of the moment, or sometimes what I like to call the range of the shift. Or the range of the weekend shift or whatever it is, because they tailor things to the situation that they're in, because it changes for them every day, every shift, every weekend, what have you.
Yeah, and even at the very beginning, we said compliance testing. It's about bending the rules, not breaking them, because they know that the breaking of the rule right off the bat would be a wake-up call for staff. So what they do is they try to do things a little bit slow, a little bit small, so it's kind of ambiguous as to whether the staff member can go either way. That's why it's about bending the rules. That's why we tell rookies at the very beginning, hug those rules. Don't bend them, follow them to a T, because any little deviation at the very beginning can push you down the wrong path. And then we talked about familiarity, that's building trust, the plausible deniability, the social pressure, which is basically if I'm new and an inmate comes up to me and starts throwing out a more senior officer's name saying, well, Russ allows it, they're using that to pressure me because maybe I feel a little bit confused. Remember, the reason why I said it's complex is because when the inmate employs the game, they figure if they can make the staff member a bit confused, then the staff member may make a hasty decision just to alleviate the confusion. And if they're looking for facts, if an inmate throws out a senior officer's name, especially if it's an officer's name that you have respect for, they're not going to say, oh, a senior inmate. No, they're going to say an officer. They're going to say someone that they think you're connected to. And that's an effort to pressure your decision in their favor. And then the subtle defiance is pushing small limits to see what they can get away with. And that's why we also tell rookies, go for conflict. At the very beginning, even if it's a subtle little break in the rule or a sudden little bend, I want you to go address that inmate, to let that inmate, one, know that you've acknowledged what they've done, and two, you're going to address it so they don't think in the long run they could push it further and further. Because if you notice at the very beginning here, I said the objective here for testing boundaries and feeling you out is, one, to identify weak points, to gauge your authority, and determine if you can be manipulated over time. And that ultimately is what you want to come in and set that template that shows that you won't be. And that relates very well to what me and Russ taught on the channel back in the past. You come in and set that zero tolerance level, because if not, any little crack, any little vulnerability, it could be something that they could exploit. Now,
And that
again,
I was just going to say, just going back to the to the little phrases, and that's one that they'll always add on top of that when they're doing this gauging process is this. Oh, my bad, and it just to minimize whatever it is that's happened, and it may be something actually minimal, but they'll do that just to keep reinforcing that phrase in your mind over and over again, to a point where they're trying to minimize everything, and so that's why they do rely on this neuro-linguistic programming of officers, if you will.
Yeah, and you're right, because when you start to expose the game that they're playing, then they may try to minimize. That's why, one of the things they said here, which is true, it goes plausible deniability when inmates keep statements vague enough to walk back later. I've seen that enough. That's why you always want to hold inmates to specifics. I'm sorry. What are you trying to get at? Because if they keep it vague, you really can't hold them responsible if they're playing a game. But if you hold them to specifics and say, hey, listen, I'm sorry. Are you trying to say this or that? Because it's not making any sense to me. Tell me what you're trying to accomplish. And then that puts the accountability out there. So number 2 I got, we see this played out a lot, is manipulating the officer's emotions. So what's the objective here? To make the officer feel responsible for their well-being, to lower the officer's guard or lower the staff member's guard, and create emotional ties. So what are the angles that we have here? So we have guilt and sympathy. So that's making the officer or staff member feel responsible for their struggle. Isolation tactics, basically positioning the officer or staff member as their only trustworthy officer. Flattery and ego boosting, so that's making the officer or staff member feel special or different from other officers. And then the moral dilemmas, focusing on the officer's ability to choose between following the rules and appearing compassionate. And I got some phrases and tactics here, but I want to mention one last thing, just in the back of our mind when we go over these phrases. That moral dilemma, forcing you as the officer, you as the staff member, to choose between following the rules, so that's what the agency expects from you, and appearing compassionate. And that's where I talk about authority rests between being assertive and professionally empathetic. Once you start crossing into aggression on the one side of emotion and overly sympathetic on the other, is where the inmates can play into that. And right there, imagine that, a moral dilemma. Here, if you follow the rules, this is how it's going to make me feel. Remember, you got to do ultimately what the agency tells you to do, because you're trusted to carry that out. And at no way should you ever allow an inmate to make you feel that your choice to follow the rules of the job affects your moral compass. So here's some phrases and tactics. You're the only officer that treats us fair, so that's flattery to gain favor. You ain't like the rest of them, creating division between you and other staff. I see how you are. You got heart, playing on your empathy. You don't understand what it's like in here, trying to make you sympathetic. You must hate this place too, and that's fishing for shared negativity. Come on, boss, it's just a small thing, minimizing a rule violation. You wouldn't let someone suffer, right? Guilt tripping you into special treatment. They don't treat us like humans, trying to make you feel responsible for their situation. We ain't got nothing in here, creating pity to justify rule breaking. You could make a difference if you wanted to, placing responsibility on you. And you ain't one of those COs that don't care, right? Testing if you can be emotionally manipulated. Russ, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's just really, that stuff is like so prevalent within the things that you encounter, and it's one of those things that it's like most of the time that's the kind of stuff that it just has to be like, water off of a duck's back. A lot of times, I would not even address that directly. I would just say, hey, it is what it is. I'll pull out my little catchphrase, and it's just against the rules, and sorry for your bad luck in here. And they don't necessarily like that or cotton to it, but what they want to do is they want to extend the length of the interaction, because the longer that they can extend it, the more that they will do this thing that I call developing discrepancy. And there shouldn't really actually be any discrepancy there. But in your mind as a human being, and we're all human beings, is there is sometimes a little bit of sympathy mixed with the empathy, where we do understand, hey, they're having a hard time getting a phone call, or they don't have very much inside here. And yeah, because it's prison, because it's jail, it is whatever it is. But that doesn't mean that we're completely inured to the human condition. But that also doesn't mean that we have to do something to improve their lot that falls outside the bounds of policy, procedure, law, case law, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and guys, even when you look at this stuff, when it comes to playing on the emotions, me and Russ did shows on this in the past before, about chasing respect, when at the end of the day, you don't chase respect. Respect comes automatically by you doing your job. So you don't need the inmate's approval. A lot of these stuff that are based on emotion is really actually pushing on the officer or the staff members want to be liked and accepted by the inmate population. And got to remember something, guys, that's, if you look at it through that way, that's going to be very conditional based on their terms. So with that said, you got to hold your ground and know the filter of who you need to be to those inmates comes from the agency. You whatever you have to do is through the agency's trust, through their prescribed role that they have assigned you. So if you start allowing that to be filtered through the approval of the inmate, that you're really at that point not doing what's expected of you, and you're easily going to fall down the rabbit hole and wind up catching yourself in the handcuffs. And I'm going that extreme because I believe that's the truth. I 100% believe that the truth. I believe that the people that get caught up on the softer side of things because the inmate plays on the emotion is because at some point they were able to easily pull the officer out of their prescribed role by utilizing compassion and sympathy and all these moral dilemmas, when at the end of the day, like Russ said, water off a duck's back. I have a job to do. This is my job. If you have a problem, grieve it. And, let's hope I'm supported. All right. So the next one I got is grooming and rule breaking and favors. Or what is it? Grueling for rule breaking and favors. Okay. So what's the objective here? The objective is to gradually push you into small favors that escalate into major rule breaking. So what are the angles? Incremental compliance, so starting small and slowly increasing the ask. And we talked about that, right? You don't start big because that makes the officer wake up. Like, what are you doing? They start small and rather ambiguous. Normalizing rule breaking, making it seem like no big deal. Creating a debt, making you feel obligated to return a perceived favor. And we've talked about that many times before, especially the inmates that offer to protect you. It's like, well, I got my staff to protect me. What do I need you to protect me for? And that automatically puts the inmate in a higher position. And then minimizing justification, downplaying the consequences of your actions. And we talked about this too when it comes to that cognitive dissonance where something's wrong, and for some reason you're still doing it, and then eventually you shift your justifications. You wind up starting to justify what you're doing, which then ultimately changes your mindset into ultimately agreeing with what you are doing. Okay, so phases and tactics. Here's some phrases here. I meant to say phrases. Hey, can you do me a solid? So that's soft starting a favor request. Hey, let me ask you something real quick. Easing into a bigger ask. It's just between us, so trying to establish secrecy. Nobody will know if you help me out, so that's encouraging discretion. I had an officer before that used to, and that's suggesting that previous staff allowed it. If you really wanted to, you could, pressuring you to override the rules. You got the power to do it. Don't act like you don't, guilt tripping you into compliance. You got some pull around here, right? Trying to make you feel like an authority figure. It's just a little extra. What's the harm? And that's minimizing the request. I won't ask for anything else. So that's a common lie to lower your defenses. And you don't got to tell nobody. And that's reinforcing secrecy. You know what's funny? Where it says you got the power to do it and don't act like you don't, guilt tripping you into compliance. Man, if an inmate was to say that to me, automatically in my mind, I'm thinking this person is trying to have authority over me. I would feel that. And no matter how they may think they're hiding that attempt, you're telling me how to do my job. I mean, however aggressive. And automatically, when it comes to that, I automatically stand my ground and I go right back at that inmate. I will not allow my authority to be challenged. And I think that statement right there is a direct challenge to your authority. What's your thoughts on all this, Russ?
Okay, so one thing that I additionally see in with those phrases is when an inmate approaches you, usually a worker type or something, but they will inform you and reinforce that they've done something for you, whatever that is. You know, they cleaned up the day room for you, and then as soon as they inform you of that, or maybe even a few minutes later, then comes the request. Is it okay if? Or they'll say, we want to. And then that way it sounds less like a request. And then they're only asking for some like tacit permission, maybe not express permission in order to do, you know, this, that, or the other thing. So that's one part. The other part, you know, when it comes to when we use terms like this that you've got up there, grooming. Grooming is a process where someone steps from one side of a line to the other side of the line. This is where someone gets pulled out from the position and authority that they have in order to join something that, for whatever reason, seems more appealing to them at the moment. And this is where, you know, inmates include you in us, you know, or you're not, you're less like them, you're more like us. Maybe not stated out loud, but tacitly implied, but sometimes maybe expressly implied, not implied, but expressly stated. And so when you're looking at that, they are trying to, you know, move you into their world where you become one of them. And even though you're still wearing, you know, green or khaki or whatever it is that you're wearing, now you're wearing what they're wearing, blue, orange, whatever it is, and they want you to identify as them. And that's a really dangerous thing, because that means that they're not just looking to get by. They're not just looking for a few favors. They're not just looking to breach some security thing that you're never going to know about. They want you to help them breach that security knowingly.
Yeah, and those partnership words, we and us, or all that, and then the other side, them or they. I always ask, well, who's we? I'm sorry, who's we, and who's us, and what do you mean by them?
We
Because
French.
yeah, well, yeah, I'm not understanding what you mean by that. You got to elaborate on that. But guys, again, the grooming is more for the long term. So again, if you're new, that's why I always tell people start off with that zero tolerance. The book I wrote on breaking boundaries really focuses a lot on grooming. It does, because that's what cultivates these relationships. And you know what's funny is a lot of these undue relationships do start off with a feeling of obligation at some extent, like Russ said, the cleaning of the day room or the offer of protection, and then that will be quickly thrown at you once you accept it. And it's funny because, like Russ mentioned, the obligation does become an expectation because the inmate doesn't ask. They kind of subtly tell. They kind of subtly tell you that this is what we're going to do, you know, and then quick to say, hey, I cleaned the day room for you, so we're going to go ahead and do A, B, C, D. You know, and they make it look like it's such a smooth thing that it's not the end of the world, because they want to make sure that the weight of that statement is not the secondary part, it's the first part. The first part of that statement is, I cleaned the day room for you. So that will be loud and clear. And then what they do next will be quick, because they want you to lean on the fact that, hey, you owe me. And it's like, you got to be wary. Obligation is something that I truly believe is the foundation for a lot of undue relationships inside the prison setting, because they play into the need to give back. That's why you have to make it clear at the end of the day, you're not doing it because I asked you to do it, or you're doing it because I told you to do it. And somewhere along the line, that has to be on the back of your mind, because in the end, I don't owe you. I don't owe you. You did it because you had to do it, because I told you to do it. All right, let's see. So the next one I got here is creating conflict between staff. So what's the objective? To divide and conquer by fostering distrust between staff, between officers. So what are the angles? So we have information phishing. So that's gathering intel on staff dynamics. Staff division, so turning officers against each other. Policy confusion, exploiting inconsistencies in enforcement that could happen between partners, between supervisors and staff, between different shifts. And I've seen it. I've seen first and second shift argue about cleaning supplies, and the inmates play into that. and lying and deception. So fabricating conflicts or false approval. So what are some of the phrases here? Hey, what do you think about Officer Hamilton? Trying to get some gossip, bait gossip. Sergeant told me it was cool. Check with him. So shifting blame to superiors. They let us do it on the other shift, creating division between shifts. And we already talked to another CO and they said it was cool. And that's about spreading misinformation. Hey, guys, I want to mention something here before Russ gives his thought. If they say, well, Hamilton allows it, your objective is going to be, I'm going to go talk to Hamilton, make sure, one, he knows you're dropping his name, and two, to see if this is even true. And then the other thing, sometimes they'll say, well, the COs allow us to do it. Give me the CO. Name the CO. Name the supervisor. You keep on saying a lot of generalities. Oh, the other shift allows it. Who specifically on the other shift allows it, so I can go ahead and talk to them and just get some clarity on why they're saying yes to this and why I'm saying no. What's your thought? And by the way, that plays out very well when they're able to divide. If inmates feel that they can isolate you, and that there's probably no chance in hell that you're going to go to your peers because of this division, then they'll throw out shit like that all day, because they know at the end of the day, you're not going to have the courage to remove the assumption of what you think you know or what they're trying to pass to actually deal with it directly. So, hey, Russ allows, or Officer Hamilton allows us to do it. Well, that's an assumption. At least to me it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go directly to Russ. So if they could put a divide between me and Russ, that may be a name that they utilize because they don't think I'm going to have the courage to go to Russ. And you don't want the inmates ever thinking that. You want to make sure the inmates know that we are together, we're united. And if you're going to say something about Russ, I'm still as an officer going to go to Russ and let him know what you just said. And that makes them a little bit more wary of the games they try to employ. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah, this is one of the things I like to redirect that stuff. When they tell me that, someone else said it was okay, I would say, okay, have them get back to me. We have enough things to do in a day without having to track someone down and ask them if they said it's okay. And that tends to, always put the stop to it, because usually what that person has said has, either been crossed. Well, if it's okay with Hamilton, it's okay with me, or they've said something, that's held to a lesser degree, where they were going to get, part of what was mentioned, or they may have not said anything at all. And so that's the kind of thing where it really, what they're doing serves two purposes. They try and get, permission up front from you without having to go to the other person that they've mentioned who may have nothing to do with it. And the other part of it is it erodes, what you're thinking about that other staff member, because like, really, they're letting them get by with this, and especially if you have not been there as long as the other staff member has been, or maybe you're only, in that unit 2 days a week or whatever it is, because you've got a relief kind of gig going on. Then that makes you think that that what they're doing is right and your opinion of it is wrong, and that's not necessarily the case. And so that tends to, fly up. The other thing that they tend to do a lot of is they'll report back to you, kind of usually in a roundabout way, about what some other officer said about you, or a supervisor said, and try and make you believe that there's a conflict there. There may be a conflict there, but they're trying to, really, whip it up. They're trying to, bring it to the forefront, because where there's conflict, there's opportunity. And so you have to be aware of that too, and just tamp down on that stuff, and make them realize that, hey, you're gonna either track that stuff down, or you're gonna ignore it, and it's not gonna get them anything, because that's really where the crease is, and that crease is where they can get in there, and they can create that wedge, and they can get something that they normally wouldn't get.
Yeah, and I like the suggestion of doing, either way, if you want to track it down or you don't want to track it down. The reason why I like to go to the staff members is I like to let them know that the inmate's saying these things about them. I especially if the person's in a position of influence, like admin, because then I'm very curious to see how the staff member reacts. Like admin, if I got an inmate dropping your name, maybe if you employ them at a job where they have connection to you, are you going to remove them? Or are you going to fire them? Or, because again, if you're using that person's name of influence, that person now, that inmate is now trying to borrow on your authority to now maneuver me. And I'm very curious to see how you protect your position of authority in an effort to protect my ability to do the job. So I can understand both ways, but I've always done it where if someone drops someone's name, I take it as, oh, you're trying to challenge what I'm doing. Usually they may go for a step higher, whether it's a senior officer, whether it's a sergeant or above. I mean, obviously, they're going to go for where they feel is the greater influence. And then I'm going to call them out on it. Okay, fine. Hey, Sarge, stop by real quick. And I've done it. If you want me to do this, then let me know. But this inmate's dropping your name. And then it puts the inmate in a very unique spot. It does. And, but either way, you're right. I'm curious to see even, I like what you said too, the other perspective too, where are you able to get that person to come back to me? Because that's unique, because that also shows you a little something, shows you the person's under that person's thumb. So if the person says, yeah, I'll go talk to the sergeant, he'll come see you. Oh yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, let me see if that happens. Let me see if the sergeant comes down and comes sees me based on your order. Yeah, that would be unique. Okay, so I got playing the victim. So the objective here is to evade consequences, shift blame, and gain sympathy. So what are the angles exploited? So you have deflection, so avoiding accountability by focusing on unfair treatment. You got the pity play, so that's using hardship to justify rule breaking. You got guilt manipulation, so that's making officers second guess their actions. And you got victim mentality, which is claiming persecution to avoid consequences. So what are some of the phrases here? I don't ever ask for anything. So that's pretending they really request favors. I get treated worse than everyone else. So that's claiming some level of bias. Nobody else got written up for this. So that's deflecting accountability. Why are you always messing with me? And that's making officers question their levels of enforcement. And I've seen victim cards played out usually as it may not always be a first resort. It could develop into it if they know they can connect to that softer, more human side. But ultimately, if you start pushing back with accountability, then they start shifting blame. So the victim card winds up going into blaming someone else. And ultimately, you got to keep on enforcing that level of accountability to get past those two layers. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, the victim card can often be really used to great effect. I just went through a thing with a particular individual, or I should say individuals, who they were really upset at this particular guy in probation. And all that they would do is they would keep getting back to the fact that this guy had never cut them a break, that he had not helped them in any matter whatsoever, and they were talking to me, and I was just like, don't they know that I've been here all along? I've been there when they've had conversations with him, and that they've been through the things that I've seen with him time and time and time again, and they have received breaks, and yet that doesn't stop them from telling me that they haven't. And then they justify all of the things that go on, and then they try and whittle it down. Well, all I need is one more break, and that happens to be the same thing that they said last time and the time before, and so forth. And if they repeat it out loud, there's an expectation that you're going to believe it automatically. And it's just amazing to watch the way that they minimize things, the way that they justify things, and the way that they the way that they are always in the right because things didn't break right for them. And yet when you look back at their history and the charges that they've had before, it's the same thing rebounding over and over and over again. And so they want to pull you into the same cycle that they're caught in, is in essence what it is.
Yeah, and guys, this is where you do have to stand your ground the most. You can't allow that card to be played, because once they know that door is open, it is something that they constantly play. And that's where, your moral compass. They'll try to get your moral compass to conflict with the rules that you have to issue. And at the end of the day, you're trusted to do a job as prescribed to you, and you can't allow that shift, that victim card to shift, because that victim card does play into that either or. Like if I commit to my rules and hold you accountable, well, then I must be an asshole human being. And you cannot allow that to play out at that level. All right, we got another one. So we got established mutual understanding for manipulation. The objective here is to blur professional boundaries and create false loyalty. So what are the angles here? Implied reciprocity, so that's making officers feel they owe inmates something, kind of falls into the obligation. False loyalty, so creating a personal connection to manipulate future decisions. Distorting professionalism, so that's making officers question their firm stance. And selective respect, talked about this, rewarding leniency and punishing strictness. This is what we talked about before. You don't chase for respect. It comes by you just doing your job. It's not conditional. It's do your job. That's the respect, not, if you're lenient, I'll get, no, that's about being liked, and you're not here to be liked. Some of the phrases you may see here is, if you were in my shoes, you get it. So that's a level of seeking empathy. We got to look out for each other in here. So that's creating a false partnership. I thought we had an understanding. So there's a little bit of guilt tripping there. And then other officers don't trip on this, and that's encouraging leniency through peer pressure. Russ, what's your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, you talk about, blurring the lines, or just, trying to, smudge things out. It can become very difficult when you're doing your job day to day, especially where there are elements of truth to what's being said. If other officers are just letting, anything and everything slide, and then you come on there on, on some other day, and, suddenly it's all incumbent upon you to enforce all the rules. You can't just go in there, gangbusters by yourself, because you're going to be defeated by that. Truthfully, I'm not saying that you should concede the game or whatever it is, but your level of being able to tune things up to the right level is going to be severely diminished and impacted, and you're only going to be able to establish so much. So, but just sitting back and just taking it and saying, hey, well, it just is what it is, and no one else is doing it, and now you're doing the same thing that inmates doing. You're justifying, your lack of activity, based on an environment that the inmates helped create. Actually, in teamwork with the officers, and it's a really bad situation. It also can be very dangerous at that point. So you just have to really look at what's going on, tune things up to yourself, try and get other staff members on board and pull them in, and try and counter manipulate what's going on. And there really is something to be said for that, because oftentimes when you see a unit that's acting like that, it's because that they haven't had any real leadership. And real leadership is exerted by the fact that you get people on board with what's going on. You become the person that they want to model, and you put the inmates back in check, where they're no longer the ones out there, running the show. And I just think that, that there's a lot of people out there who may not yet fully realize what they're capable of with regards to leadership, because they're early on in their career. The problem is if they go for too long, they'll never become effective, and they'll never become the leader that they could have been.
Yep. And now, guys, just one last thought, just a final thought here. Inmates are strategic, so they don't rely on one tactic. They test multiple angles, watching for weaknesses. So these aren't just always employed one at a time, but rather could be employed multiple tactics at once. And here's how you defend yourself. You got to stay unemotional. So keep responses neutral and short. Shut it down early. Don't let conversations evolve into manipulation. Never justify too much. The more you explain, the more they analyze, and recognize patterns. If they keep trying the same angle, they're working on you. Hey, Russ, any thoughts in closing, brother?
Yeah. I think the last time that we did a video, I talked about ending the conversation quickly and ending the conversation definitively, and not leaving any room for interpretation or error. And that's really important, because if they draw you out into this protracted conversation where it's becoming like a courtroom now, and everybody gets to give their view and what they think is right and stuff, you're just going to devolve this into a situation where they will gain some ground. It may not be very much, but it will be a little bit. And that's what they want to do. They want to chip away, chip away, chip away. So what you just have to do is you have to end it. You end it quickly, you end it definitively and unambiguously, in a way that there's no subjectivity. There's nothing left to try and analyze and figure out what did the officer really mean by that. And that's the way you have to do it. I see so many officers that they just keep going back, and they keep talking and talking and talking and talking, and that's not what we're there to do. It's really antithetical towards good correctional practices to just keep the conversation going. In real life, with family and friends and things like that, that's a different thing. In corrections, not advisable in the least.
And guys, this was just a quick discussion. I'm going to put it up and just put it out there into the world. And as always, thank you, Russ, for coming on. And guys, if you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.